Erin Mendenhall, newly elected mayor of Salt Lake City, thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've been on the job now for about 30 days.
A little over.
How are you doing? You feel like you're getting your arms around this? Is it what you expected it would be?
Yeah, actually, it kind of is. If you can expect that no day is going to be the same and that you might have a press conference you didn't plan on and there's events and decisions to be made every hour, and I'm loving it. So I wake up excited every day. I have an amazing team. We held on to a lot of the institutional knowledge that was in City Hall already, hopefully myself included from my 6 years on the council, but it's been a very seamless transition and we are hard at work every single day, and I'm grateful to be there.
It's one thing to run for the office. It's another thing to occupy it altogether. What surprises you the most about being the mayor of Salt Lake City?
It's absolutely true. Governing is very different from campaigning. I think what surprises me the most is the sort of inundation I feel and I'm receiving from the community, from the business community, from even the state legislature, although we're in the middle of the session, so I don't want to rock the boat too much, to say, let's work together. There's some big things we want to do. There's some things that have been on the back burner. There's some ideas that we have. Can we sit down? And I say, of course we can sit down. Let's talk. There's more we can do, and there's more we can do better together than apart. And so that willingness to work and the invitations to show up to conversations and get some things done has been a wonderful surprise, actually.
Recently, you were at a news conference where there was an officer-involved shooting. We don't normally see the mayor at a news conference like that. Do you plan to do that kind of thing, or are we going to see you at every good and bad event in the city?
I think that's my job, to show up. And I'm very grateful that that officer didn't sustain lethal injuries. I actually just spoke with him on the phone on my way here to check in on how he's doing. It's a tragedy. He's recovering. He's home now from the hospital and surgery went well. It's a tragedy for the woman who lost her life in that incident. And I think it's important that the mayor's there because community feels this. We feel this when there's a violent incident, and I'm grateful also for our police officers who I think handled themselves well. Of course, there's an ongoing investigation, but and we're grateful for our policing partners who do that. But it's my job to show up, whether it's for a ribbon cutting or for a tough press conference. I do plan to be there.
Salt Lake City is going after the Winter Olympics again. It's an exciting announcement just been made. You're going to serve on that committee. How is the process going to be different this time around?
There are some changes that happened at the IOC level. The International Olympic Committee made these changes just back in June so that it's not just a city that bids. It can be a group of cities or even a state. This is a partnership with the Salt Lake City, Utah Winter Olympic Committee that we're putting together. We announced it just earlier today. And we are in the very early phases, but we want to formally make ourselves available for the opportunity, whether it's 2030 or 2034. Those are the conversations that are beginning now with the USOPC and Salt Lake City and the state of Utah to make sure that we are bidding for a game that is financially viable so that we can get the sponsorship we would need to. We know we can pull off a great games. We know we have a community that's supportive of it, that wants to show up, volunteer, and welcome the world. And now we get down to the business of deciding whether or not it's a good bid for 2030 or 34.
The interactions with the IOC the last time around, there was scandal and there was all kinds of stories and rumors and all kinds of issues. Has that pretty much gone away? And what obstacles or challenges in that relationship with the IOC still remain that have to be overcome?
That was 18 years ago. Well, actually, 18 years ago today, we were a few days into the games. And so the scandal and the problems were, of course, over 2 decades ago that happened. And I think part of the beauty of the 2002 Winter Olympic Games in Salt Lake City in Utah was that we did very well. We have run sustainable facilities since then. We don't just have an idea of the kind of facilities we'd need. We're running them today. And there's a world competition going on starting on Friday at our Kearns Olympic Oval for speed skating. These are thriving places. And so I think the lesson's been learned. I don't think that anybody who's celebrating the opportunity that we're hoping to have for a future Olympics has any doubt that we won't know how to run it very well and keep things as they should be, clean, transparent, and honest.
There was concern back prior to 2002 about the Olympics coming here and the effect that that might have on the environment. What are the environmental concerns going forward this time?
Certainly, and I think if you look the world over, that the experience of hosting, whether it's a summer or a winter Olympic Games, doesn't always go well for places, and that's part of really what makes us stand out in the worldwide community as a successful bid for a future Olympics, that we did it well and it's still working well. Some of the opportunities when it comes to the environment are some potentially massive investments in transportation, public transit infrastructure. And we saw that with the building of the TRAX line. Right. We had just 2 lines and 25 stops in 2002. We have 3 lines and 50 stops today. We serve 67,000 commuters a day on that system. I would love to see that system grow, and that's a benefit that we would sustain into the future. You know that half of our pollution today, especially during the winter months, comes from cars. So the more we can do to build a public transit system, the better our air quality is going to be, and that's a good investment for everyone.
You have come a long way from the early days of your environmental activism. I believe you were with Utah Moms for Clean Air back in the day when that was first getting started. And you've always been a voice for a clean environment, especially clean air. The question that I have for you here is, in terms of now being the mayor of Salt Lake City, are you as much in the driver's seat now as you anticipated you might be before you took the office?
I think so, and possibly more so given the first question that I answered around the opportunity of relationships and collaborations that I didn't necessarily assume would be there when I came into office. The mayor has her hands on all of the contracting abilities of the city, and the biggest one in my mind at this point is our relationship with Rocky Mountain Power. We have an agreement that is driving us toward a 2030 100% renewable energy relationship with Rocky Mountain Power, which would be an incredible and appropriate move for us to make. I would like to see that relationship move 2030 even sooner, so that 100% renewable energy is in our city faster than it is planned to today. And that's an ongoing negotiation that we will be picking up in the coming year. There's also the opportunity to look at carbon sequestration. And so that's talking about bringing pollution out of the air, not just limiting the pollution we put into it. Public transit, of course, is one of the ways we limit that, reducing people's need to commute by building thriving communities where you can grocery shop, get to work, go recreate, get your kids to school without having to drive very far or maybe drive at all. But when it gets to carbon sequestration and getting that out of the air, we are looking to plant 1,000 trees per year on our city's west side, which is where we have the highest pollution monitor in the city, in the Rose Park area in particular. We plant about 1,000 trees a year as it is today citywide. We will continue to do that, but we're going to double it and plant 1,000 more each year on the west side of Salt Lake City. And trees do an incredible amount of air quality work. Mm-hmm. They produce good emissions, and they bring bring pollution out of the air. They also make it easier to walk. They increase property values. They make it cheaper to heat and cool your home. There's a lot of benefits. So there are many levers, from big contracts that we can work on, public transportation investments, to the trees and the shovels we put in the ground.
You mentioned by 2030, the goal is to be completely on renewable energy for Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. How does that work? I mean, what does that look like? How would that be different for the average resident of the city?
Ideally, they won't even know that the price would be the same as we would be paying for fossil fuel consumption, and the energy coming into the system of Rocky Mountain Power's large system, which extends far beyond Salt Lake City and even beyond Utah, would be putting enough renewable energy into it to support all the energy that we take out of the system. So it gets complicated. You should have someone from Rocky Mountain Power on to explain how what's in that transmission line is a mix of energy sources. But fortunately, the marketplace, the federal regulations are driving energy producers toward looking into and building more renewable opportunities. As a city, we've already partnered with Rocky Mountain Power to build a pretty massive solar project out here on the west side of Salt Lake City, and that will be supporting 85% of just our municipal power needs. The 88 buildings or so that we have as a city will be renewable in about 2 or 3 years.
There is quite a debate going on right now in regard to the inland port. Let's talk about that. The environmentalists don't want to see it happen no matter what. They're afraid of what it'll do to the environment. The business community, on the other hand, looks at this as a wonderful opportunity to step onto the international stage even more than Utah is now. Now, as an environmentalist who has ascended to the mayor's office, one of your jobs as mayor is to champion economic development in the city, to grow our tax base and give us the kind of money that we need to accomplish what needs to be accomplished by the city. But on the other hand, as an environmentalist, you have a heart that wants to protect the environment.
That's right.
How do you balance this debate between the inland port and the environment?
I share in the concerns that many of the environmentalists are bringing up, and I think that that is absolutely the overarching need for us to address as we go forward. Unfortunately, this isn't a question of whether or not there will be development in the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City. It's a question of how it develops and how they invest in that development. Is it for a clean port, or is it just the fastest and quickest things they can get in the ground and start to make some money? That is not what we want to see in Salt Lake City. And as you know, we've appealed to the Supreme Court, hopefully if they decide to keep it, on the lawsuit that we raised, which really isn't about whether or not there will be a port. It's about who controls the land use decisions and who gets the tax increment, that growth in taxes over time for the area. And so my goal going forward is a three-prong approach, really. We will be continuing with the appeal. There's a legislative component, and we're now in the third legislative session with an inland port, really fourth if you count a special session that happened in between. And we anticipate there will be legislation year over year over year as it develops, and tweaks need to be made, no matter how big or small. That's really a can of worms. That inland port legislation could hurt or help us any given year, and a lot of that depends on the relationships at the time, frankly, of the politicians who are at play. We're looking at a port that's going to develop over decades. How do we as a city achieve a confidence that the environment will not be sacrificed for the sake of some people looking to make some money and growing an economy here in the state of Utah? That is my job. That's my number one objective as the mayor. And so we will be working on that second prong of the legislation year over year and trying to make it better also for the other 248 cities and towns who could in the future be impacted by the state using that same piece of legislation to do some other project in their area. And the third component would be looking to find a way that we could gain more surety over time, given that legislation will come and go year over year, that the environment, that the tax dollars that are spent will not be used for anything that is going to increase pollution or hurt our environment. We've already talked about how the west side of Salt Lake City is more polluted and has worse air quality than other parts of the city. This is an environmental justice issue. There are more children on the west side of Salt Lake City per capita than there are in the other parts of the city. This is an issue about our future. It's about our kids. And fortunately, I think part of the silver lining in this is that the marketplace, the building community, the transportation community is looking at a massive transformation really in the way we build. It is getting cleaner. The business case is there for cleaner buildings, for fewer emissions, for less fuel consumption, for renewable energy. And it's not just me making that case, it's people looking to invest in the area. So fortunately, the environmental case is being made at the macro level of the economy when we talk about growing that tax base. It's not me alone. It's not the people protesting and the activists alone who are saying we can do this and we should.
I want to frame this question, and it may be a little bit redundant to what you just said, but I'd like to get your take on this in terms of the way this question is framed. Is it possible to have an inland port that is carbon neutral or at least does not harm the environment?
I don't believe that we can say it isn't possible. They haven't built a port like that anywhere in the world. We are in serious non-attainment with the Clean Air Act. There is no more stringent designation from the EPA than the one that we have right here and where the inland port is looking to go. That is a very real federal framework that the crafters of the inland port will have to fit within. And I think it's a good thing for us because that means that they can work to build a port that has never been built before using the most cutting-edge technology, from transportation infrastructure investment to the type of buildings to mitigation and mediation for water, light, noise, and air quality issues, even transportation impacts that can happen. So I think it might be possible. We haven't explored it enough yet, and we don't have the business plan yet from the Inland Port Authority to be able to say, if that's what you're planning to do, here's what the results will be. Those things I hear are forthcoming from the Inland Port Authority, and we really look forward to getting some definitions on what it is they're looking to do and what those impacts will be. We need to start talking about this from a data perspective. We have great groups like Wasatch Front Regional Council and UDOT who do modeling, and they look at what kind of an impact might a growth or a development such as this have on our system, on our environment. These entities exist. The Inland Port Authority is going to be doing modeling to show what those impacts may be, and then I look forward to having these other third-party reputable organizations look at their modeling and say, yeah, we agree with that, or no, that's not good enough, and we'll be holding their feet to the fire.
Let's talk about the lawsuit for just a moment. Salt Lake City sued the state over land use and taxation rights as they have to do with the inland port. You lost the first round in court, and the state kind of got to hold all the cards on that. The case is now on appeal. How optimistic are you that the city can have that ruling overturned?
We're definitely optimistic. And as you know, a district court decision does not set precedents. A Supreme Court decision will. And we think, for the sake of the other 248 cities and towns, that we need this kind of clarity on this really critical issue about core municipal function, the things that the state has said through the state constitution cities are empowered to do themselves, which is collect taxes, distribute taxes with elected officials who are representative of their people to do those things, and then make decisions about their own land use. These are overrides that are unconstitutional, and we are hopeful that the Supreme Court will decide to keep that appeal, not pour it over to a court of appeals, and that we look forward to hearing this in court. Let me tell you one more thing about the opportunity with the appeal. This makes it possible for amicus briefs to be filed by other groups. This could be cities and towns, it could be counties who see the potential for the impact of that legislation on their own places and the unique impact that it might have. So the amicus brief opportunity will expand the conversation to a statewide level, and I think that's important.
Do you anticipate this case could go all the way to the Supreme Court?
We think at this point
Supreme
the state Supreme Court is in a good place to make a final decision on it, and that's as far as we're looking for now.
All right. State Senator Luz Escamilla was your opponent in the campaign for mayor, and now she has legislation that she is introducing that would affect the inland port and mitigate some of the environmental concerns that way. And if I'm not mistaken, would also expand the representation on the board to include more of the stakeholders, especially from the city. Describe to me the relationship now between Salt Lake City and the state. Sounds like you're starting to come together in some degree.
Yes, I think our Senator Escamilla, our other senators who represent Salt Lake City, our House representatives who represent Salt Lake City have always been coming together. As mayor, I'm working very hard to work with them, keep them in the loop on things that I'm working on and listen to them about their progress. Senator Escamilla's bill is a great example of that. It's one of at least a couple of bills on the inland port that will be happening up there. And her amendments that, if should they pass, that would affect the board makeup are great. Actually, I think that the addition of the mayor's role or an appointee from the mayor's office of Salt Lake City is obviously, I think that's a great idea, and we need representation on that board in a better way than we have today. And she also has a piece about the Salt Lake City School District earning a spot on the board. Right. They are a major taxing entity. That's and right. Set to lose a huge amount of future tax increment if they aren't a part of that board decision-making process. So I think that Senator Escamilla's bill is a great piece of legislation that we're working together to figure out how does it fit with the other pieces of legislation. And I think there are a lot of things that we can gain from working together and keeping at this conversation. It includes Republican representation, there's some state leadership, and they're all coming to the table together to work on her legislation. I appreciate that.
On my way into work today, I drove past Library Square, and there were all kinds of tents and all kinds of folks who are homeless there. Now that we are quite a ways into this whole Operation Rio Grande and the new resource centers that have come online, how would you gauge the effectiveness of the steps that have been taken up to this point to deal with Salt Lake's homeless population? And will we ever see a day when those tents disappear from Library Square and elsewhere?
Yeah, good questions. I think fundamentally everyone deserves a safe place to sleep, and hopefully a home that works for them and is supported in the ways that people need support. I can't make a declaration that Operation Rio Grande did everything that it was supposed to do, and I wasn't a part of it at the time, and I think there's a lot of lessons we've learned from that process. In many ways, we poked the balloon here and it all came out in other parts of the city, and it's still there today.
Right.
We also need to look at the reality of this being a statewide issue, and that other cities enforce on things like camping ordinances, loitering, panhandling, and literally move people into Salt Lake City as well to be near services. But ultimately what that does is create a concentration of folks. On my 12th day as the mayor, I announced the opening of the Sugar House Temporary Shelter. It's been open for a couple of weeks now, and we're grateful that it's there because shortly after that opened, we experienced these 20-degree temperatures, pretty significant snowstorms, and I'm grateful for all the partners that came together. I think, though, that what we're seeing with these 96% average capacity on the 3 homeless resource centers, 2 of them in Salt Lake, 1 in South Salt Lake, and of course there's the Midvale Family Shelter, but they are operating right near capacity. We needed to make more space because it's a successful system. It's not that people aren't showing up and we have these brand new resource centers that are serving people's needs more acutely. People are showing up. They're showing up night after night, and there are hundreds of people being served every single day and night who have a warm place to go into, and it's drawing more people into seeking services. This is a good problem, actually, and it's one that we shouldn't stop at just because we've opened the 3 resource centers. We've got an emergency shelter that's closing April 15th in Sugar House. I don't intend to reopen that next year. That's a property the city owns and will be redeveloped. It's always been slated for development. But we need to be talking about what do we do next year as a regional community. This isn't just Salt Lake City's issue. Other cities, the county, Davis County, they need to come to the table, and I believe that we are. That planning process is underway, and I'm grateful for the collective momentum and support, but we can't stop now. We're not there yet.
What about the tents?
So that's it. Thank you for bringing me back to that. A lot of folks on the street that I've encountered, I'll go out and we'll go out with social workers or our police officers and try to talk to people and ask if they've sought shelter. Have you been to the homeless resource centers? I've got a van. If we bring that van up, would you pack up your things with us and go try the resource center? And in my experience, 9 out of 10 of those people, especially on Library Square, are not interested in seeking shelter. So
Why not? What do they tell you?
I'm uncomfortable speaking for the population, but in general, there's a sentiment about this is my community. There's a shared experience here that I want to be around people who understand what I've been through, what I'm going through. This is all I have, this stuff under my tarp, my tent here, and my bike, and my cart, and I don't want to leave my things. And also a sentiment that, I've tried in the past. Tried to get off the drugs. I've tried to get into shelter. It doesn't work. Why would this new system work for me? And a sense of giving up. And I think we need to look outside of the state. We need to look at cities around the country who are working hard to crack this code about the chronically homeless part of our population, and what can we do to entice them into a better, safer way of living. And some of these are around managed tiny home communities is something that I'm very interested in exploring. I think that our county partners, Shelter the Homeless, even the state is interested also in other ways around the country that are approaching this sort of shelter-resistant population that we see on our streets today.
Yeah, you mentioned Austin, Texas before. They've got a successful program going.
They do. There's an interesting program near Austin, Texas, and it's houses about 500 formerly chronically homeless individuals in about 300 tiny houses. And they live in a communal way. It's a managed place. They share cooking in a communal kitchen. There's a shared dining. They come together for laundry. There's shared laundry and those kind of outdoor amenities. And then there's some social entrepreneurship. So there's a barber shop, and people can learn how to be barbers and hairdressers. There's an auto shop, and they learn how to change oil and rotate tires. There's an iron working shop. They can become metalsmiths. And there's all of these different job opportunities, and therefore the community starts to come into this area. And I think there's some things we can learn from what's happening around the country to help people live in better ways than outside of our library on the sidewalk today.
We are nearing the anniversary of the very first woman casting a vote in an election in the United States.
Sarah Young.
Yes, that happened right here in Utah.
Right across the street from the Capitol.
What does that mean to you personally, and what does that mean to you as an elected official?
Oh, it means a great deal, actually. We have, on February 14th, the anniversary of that first vote cast, 150 years ago, and 100 years ago, the right for women to vote also. And it's wonderful that Utah is the leader on that. It makes me think of Martha Hughes Cannon, who was the first, and she was a Democrat woman, elected to serve in Congress.
Yeah.
We'll be sending her statue to the U.S. Capitol this year to represent Utah.
Yeah, you know that those of us in television have a little bit of heartburn with getting rid of Philo T. Farns. You know that, right?
Maybe you could bring that statue down here to the studio, and he could
perhaps
he could become a piece of your set.
Yeah, there you go. There you
But when I was first elected in 2013 to the City Council, I think the number of elected women holding any elected office in Utah was about 16%. Today, it's closer to 23, 24%. We're still 50% of the population. We've got a long ways to go to find equity in representation. But it does matter, and it is changing, and it's exciting. It's exciting. It's exciting that when I talk to girls on the campaign trail about how we need more women in politics and how I want them to see themselves in my shoes in 20 years or in 30 years, it's no big deal to them. It's like, of course, that's where we belong. That's my path. I can see that. And I'm not very old, but that I didn't see that path very clearly when I was a young girl. So the culture is shifting even under our feet, and it's wonderfully exciting.
You are the third woman to serve as mayor of Salt Lake City. Do you feel like a pioneer? Because, I mean,
I don't know any different.
Dee Dee Corradini was first, then there was Jackie Biskupski, and now Erin Mendenhall.
You know, when I feel it is when I walk on the 3rd floor of City Hall. And if any of the viewers haven't been to the City and County building, the beautiful castle-looking building between 4th and 5th South and State and 2nd East, come in. It's the People's House, and it's unlocked during business hours. And up on the 3rd floor are the portraits of all the mayors of Salt Lake City that have ever come before. And it's starting to get tight. We have to shift them to fit each new one in. And we are anxiously awaiting Mayor Biskupski's portrait to be done. Dee Dee's the only one hanging in that hall. And as you walk through it, there are decades of men who have served in the seat of mayor. And I do feel a little bit of the gravity of the uniqueness of it, but I think it's the future too. So I feel right at home.
As we wind up this interview, as you were campaigning to become the mayor of Salt Lake City, you set out an agenda. You had talking points and things you wanted to accomplish and great goals and vision for what you wanted your administration to be. Now that you are sitting in the chair, as you look back at that list, is there anything missing, obviously missing to you, that now that you're in the chair, you're going, you know what? We got to do this too.
Oh my gosh, there's probably several dozen of those things. I think part of that is in politics, once you win an election, a whole lot more people want to talk to you than they did before.
You become really popular.
That's true.
All of a sudden.
And so the ideas and people's visions, people's willingness to invest their time, their own reputations, their business, whatever it might be, they come out of the woodwork. And so surely I make the joke that we have 1,000 good ideas a day come into our office. And I'll tell you that my philosophy as a person, and certainly as a mayor, is around having vulnerability in life and being vulnerable to the influence, the information, the experience, the education of listening to people on a day-to-day basis, and let me be different tomorrow than I am today based on all of the interactions that take place and the things we learn over time. Let us be vulnerable as an asset. And I think that's how we evolve as a government, how we evolve as people, to be serving better, to be truly listening and reflecting the opportunities and the needs and the values of our people over time. So I welcome 1,000 good ideas a day, and then we take that in and we see how can that complement this other thing that we hadn't even thought of doing that together. It's so exciting. I've made the joke that when you're a candidate, you have, if we could liken it to being a cook, you've got about 6 ingredients when you're a candidate, and it's those things, those few things that your talking points. And once you're elected, you walk into this fantastic kitchen and the cupboard doors open, and oh my gosh, we can really cook.
All kinds of ingredients.
Now we can cook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Erin Mendenhall, Mayor of Salt Lake City, thank you so much for being part of Three
Thank you, Bob.
Questions.
It's such a pleasure.